Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Sleep No More, an Eve Duncan novel by Iris Johansen. Chapter 9. Joe and Eve were in the waiting room for over 3 hours before Jensen gave them a report. He'll be okay. The shoulder wound was only a glancing blow, and that was the worst of it, he said as he came out of the emergency room. 32 wounds inflicted to give maximum pain. Whoever did it knew what he was doing. His face was tight. Jesse could have bled to death if he'd been careless, or he might have gone unconscious from the trauma effect. Jesse's a good guy. He doesn't deserve this. Do you know who did it? No. Did he tell you? Jensen shook his head. I didn't ask him. That's not my job. But evidently it's your job. He's waiting for a room to be readied. You can go in and ask him a few questions, but I don't want him agitated. No problem. Jensen frowned. I mean it. Everyone likes Jesse Newell. The nurse on duty has been taking inquiries ever since we got here asking about him. Really? From whom? He shrugged. People from the apartment. Co-workers from the hospital where he works. Look, I've no idea what he did, but I lay odds that Jesse is clean. That guy who did this must be a complete nut. Good chance. May we see him now? Sure. He turned away. Second door on the left. Co-workers? Eve murmured as she walked with him down the hall. Pierce? If he's the one who hired Drogan, the man who did this, Drogan might have called him with a report. He checked his phone. No info on Drogan yet. Maybe Newell will be able to tell us more. I didn't get the impression that he knew much more than his name, but I could be wrong. When they entered the recovery room, Jesse Newell was lying in bed, swathed in bandages. It's about time. You've got to get me out of here. I thought you'd changed your mind and we were going to let them check you into the hospital, Eve said. Your intern friend said you were waiting for the next available room. You can't argue with hospital personnel. I know that from experience. You just have to agree. Then do your own thing. He struggled up in bed. Get me something to wear. They stripped everything off me. They had no choice, Eve said dryly. Your clothes were bloody and ripped in dozens of places. I have to get out of here now. He met Eve's gaze. I'm vulnerable here. Doctors and nurses all belong to the same club. Pierce is well known all over Santa Barbara. He or one of his cohorts could come in here and they'd welcome him with open arms. You think he'd try to kill you? Not if he could arrange for someone else to do it. But he's scared, and he might get desperate. Can you prove that he's behind this attack on you? I can't prove shit. Why do you think I was still hanging around the hospital after Beth got away? I don't know. I don't know anything about you or your motives. Then get me out of here, and you might find out, he added firmly. Clothes. Why should we help you? Joe asked. What if you split the minute we get you out of here? You take the risk, because if you don't, I'll find a way to get out of here on my own. I've wriggled my way out of tight places before. Not looking like a mummy from a grade B movie. Joe hesitated, then turned away. You'd better be worth the trouble. I'll see if I can float around the area and grab some scrubs. You expect us to smuggle you out of here? Eve asked Newell as Joe left the room. Yes, he sat up in bed, because you want me to talk about Beth Avery, and I won't do it until you spring me from this place. Why not? Why not do what I need? You must know that woman in the hospital they're calling Beth Avery is a phony, so you must know there's something nasty going on. I have suspicions, she said. Were you the one who helped Beth hide the pills in her mattress? You found out about that? Yes. I had to do it myself for the first couple of weeks. After that, she had the clarity to help me hide them. Was it Drogan who tried to kill her that night? I didn't know his name, just that he was hired to do the job. But from things he said while he was working on me tonight, I'm sure that he was the one. He was angry with her. He expected a victim, and she was tough enough to fight him. He smiled. Hell, she was strong enough to beat him. And he was proud of her, Eve realized. It mattered to him that Beth was no longer the drugged, mindless creature she had been told about. The knowledge brought a rush of warmth toward him. She was bedridden, wasn't she? I would have thought that her muscles would have been too weak to function after all those years. She wasn't in bed all the time. It depended on what doctor was on Pierce's forwarded list. From what I can glean from her medical history during most of her stay, the orders were to keep her fit and well exercised. That sounds like training a horse. Except they don't keep a horse drugged and under hypnosis for the majority of their waking hours. Hypnosis? She had regular sessions with Pierce and an expert from Berlin from the moment she arrived here in Santa Barbara. Some kind of therapy? You might call it that. I understand the expert from Berlin was a Dr. Hans Gelber who specialized in erasing the damaging memories of vets who suffered trauma during the wartime. I thought it was curious that Pierce thought that a skiing accident would cause that serious a trauma. Memory erasure. She shuddered at the thought. Losing a part of your life as if it had never been. How do you know all this? I don't know nearly enough. His gaze narrowed on her face. But evidently more than you. What are you doing nosing around here? What's Beth Avery to you? You said you didn't know her. I don't. I never met her, she paused. But she's my sister. Newell went still. I didn't know she had a sister. No one told me. He shook his head. Beth would have told me. Eve's lips twisted. We appear to be in the same boat. No one told me either until she disappeared. My mother had to sign papers that Beth's birth was not to be disclosed. And I doubt if Beth knew about me. My mother kept her word. Beth belonged to the Averys and not to her. Interesting. His gaze focused on her face. You don't look like her. No, but there's a slight family resemblance. Bonnie's curly hair that was so like that of Beth's in the photo. And I'm sure that she looks more like her father. He was very good looking, wasn't he? Yeah, I guess so. Beth said he was the handsomest man she'd ever seen. She only saw him a few times a year, but she loved him. She still loves him. He was carefully taking off the bandages on his face and neck. The bastard never visited her since she came to that hospital. What are you doing with those bandages? Quinn called me a mummy. The bandages attract too much attention. They'll stop me if I try to walk out of here with them on my face. I can cover the ones on my chest and arms. He frowned impatiently. If Quinn gets a move on and brings me... Shut up, Joe said as he came into the room. He tossed a bundle of blue-green scrubs on the bed. It takes time to walk in and steal surgical garb from under the noses of everyone in the ER. We're just lucky it's a busy night. Tunic, pants, slippers. Do you need any help getting dressed? I can manage. Newell swung his feet to the floor. But I'll need to hurry. I can't take the chance of... He inhaled sharply as he stood up. Shit. Sure? Joe asked. Newell nodded and reached for the tunic. I'll slip out the door where the ambulance brings in the patients. Bring your car around and wait for me there. Eve gazed at him skeptically. You don't look very well. There's a good chance someone will stop you. He shook his head. Not if I do it right and look as if I know where I'm going. If I seem to have a purpose and appear a little impatient, no one is going to get in my way. Will they put out an alarm when they find this room empty? No, they'll just assume someone else has come in and taken me to an available room. hospitals aren't always efficient, and it may take them a few hours just to find out I'm not here. Believe me, I know." He was carefully working the tunic over his head. "Get out of here. I'm okay. If you say so." Eve turned away. "But if you got out another door and try to give us the slip, I'm coming after you, Newell. Don't worry, I'm not well enough to be deceptive, though I might have tried that if I thought I could get away with it," he added grimly. "But I'm not the one who is going to suffer if I move too slow. Just have that car at the entrance. I'm not going to be able to do much for a few hours beyond getting to the front door." "It will be there." Joe took Eve's arm as they left the room. "Tough. I believe we'd better look beyond the personnel record he gave to the hospital." "I'm glad he's tough. He would never have been able to get Beth out of there if he weren't," she added as they walked out of the hospital and headed for the parking lot. "He told me that he found out that she was attended by all kinds of different doctors during the years. One of the first ones was a German doctor who specialized in memory erasure by hypnosis. It was the principal treatment during her first year at the mental hospital." "Did you get his name?" "Yes, Gelber. But won't it be in the records?" "It depends on whether they wanted to have the details of that particular therapy documented." He opened the car door for her. "And what memory they were determined to erase." "You mean the memory that someone tried to kill her on that ski slope?" "I'm not sure they did." He shook his head. "I'm not sure of anything right now. We're only putting together the pieces one by one. And Newell should be able to give us a few more pieces to add to the puzzle." Eve's gaze was on the emergency door. "I think he cares about her, Joe." "We'll see. When he first came around her, evidently she was almost a vegetable. It's difficult to develop any feeling for a woman in that condition." Joe's tone was non-committal. It could be that he just hates her enemies. It would have the same effect. He started the car. "There he is, bold as brass. He's right. No one is going to stop him." Newell's skin was pale against the blue-green scrubs, but his step was firm as he came toward their car as they pulled up before him. "It's about time." He opened the rear door and climbed into the car. "I told you it was an emergency." He sat up very straight on the seat until they had driven out of the hospital zone. "Okay." He slumped back on the seat and closed his eyes. "Give me a minute. Get on the highway and head north." "Suppose we talk first," Joe said. "I can't right now, and I can't wait for you to interrogate me." His hands closed into fists at his side. "Drive, damn it. There's no time. Look, he got my cell phone. I tried to get one of those EMTs to let me use his phone to call Beth, but he wouldn't do it." "I imagine they were too busy trying to save your life," Eve said dryly. "I have to warn her, and they wouldn't listen to me. By the time I got to the hospital and persuaded the intern to let me use his phone, it was too late. She didn't answer." Eve stiffened. "You think Drogan managed to find her?" "I don't know, but there's a possibility. He could locate the nearest tower from her GPS if he has the right equipment." His lips twisted. "And he impresses me as a person who'd have the right equipment. He takes both pride and pleasure in his work. I learned that when he was cutting my flesh with such precision." "Could he con her into telling him where she's located?" Joe asked. Newell shook his head. "She's inexperienced, but she's not stupid. She'd see through him," he added, half beneath his breath. "I hope." "But you're not sure?" Eve asked. "How can I be sure? Look, Beth has had years of being told she's a mental cripple and had to be cared for. They reinforced it with hypnosis and drugs. I've only had her for the last 18 months. She's grown accustomed to trusting everyone with whom she comes in contact. Do you know how hard it was for me to break that trust?" "Tell us," Eve said. "And while you're at it, tell us why you bothered to do it." He didn't answer for a moment. "I like her. At first, I just felt sorry for her. and pissed at those sons of bitches who were making her into a living corpse. She was like a little girl lying in that bed and smiling at me whenever I came into the room. She smiled at everyone, even Pierce's whore, Stella Lenslow, who liked to come in and taunt her. The bitch was even cutting her medication during the last 6 months. She was hoping that Beth would suffer withdrawal from the drugs. He shrugged. She didn't realize that I'd begun weaning her off them. 9 months before that. But Stella's viciousness made Beth's increasing alertness more plausible. And since she was Beth's principal nurse, it worked into my plans. Toward the end, I had to make Beth pretend to be in pain a couple of times when Stella was in the room to make Stella happy and not give away the fact that the decrease in dosage had little effect. "We're on the freeway," Joe said as he entered the ramp. "Now where are we going?" 17-mile drive, near Carmel." "That's where she is?" Eve asked. He nodded. "I used to work for a man who has a house there. He always spends this time of year in the south of France, and the house is vacant. I knew it would be safe for Beth." "How? It's too close to Pierce and the hospital. I would have thought it would be safer for her to get out of California entirely." "It was better if she was close enough so that I could help her if she needed me." He paused. "Besides, she wasn't ready." "What do you mean?" "What do you think I mean?" he asked harshly. "Beth's like someone from that fairy tale who's been asleep in a tower while the whole world grew up around her. There were hazards out there that she couldn't imagine. I tried to fill her in a little, but our time together was too damn limited. And my main objective had to be to get her out of that hospital. But I knew she had to catch up before she could fit in somewhere and hide out until we found a way to keep her safe." "You've gone to a lot of risk to save Beth," Joe said. "Why? Don't tell me it was just because she was appealing and helpless. How did you know she had anything beyond that sweet smile to save? Most orderlies would have assumed that the doctors were right, and Beth Avery was a lost cause. Why didn't you? And why did you spend 18 months as an orderly anyway? It's not exactly the kind of job a Marine with your record would embrace on a long-term basis." Newell didn't answer. "I'm not going to go any farther until I know," Joe said. Newell shrugged. "Oh, what the hell. I guess it doesn't matter any longer. My uncle sent me here to check out what was going on with Beth Avery. He thought that she might have been railroaded in there, and he asked me to snoop around and find out." "Your uncle?" Eve asked. "Herman Dalker. He's a private detective." "I know." Eve recognized the name, Sandra's Hermie, whom she'd hired to find her daughter. Newell's gaze shifted to narrow on her face. "How do you know? Did your uncle tell you who hired him for the job? It was my mother, Sandra Duncan." "You're really Beth's sister. I didn't know whether to believe you." His lips twisted. "You're a little late rushing to her rescue." "You're a little late rushing to rescue her." "I'm not making excuses to you. I'm here now. My mother told me that the detective she hired had told her that he'd keep an eye on Beth for her. It sounds to me as if he was doing a good deal more than that. He liked your mother, and he didn't like what he knew about the Avery family. There wasn't any evidence that they'd done anything wrong, but he didn't like the setup, so he thought it wouldn't hurt to send me out to look things over. I needed a break after my last deployment in Afghanistan, and it didn't seem much of a challenge." She glanced at the wound on his neck. "Wrong?" He shrugged. "Some of the most innocent-looking fields are where the IEDs are planted. I expected to go in and work for a few months, make a report, then go on my way. It didn't work out that way. I didn't like the setup. I wanted to see what was happening." "And did you?" "Yes, but it took a hell of a long time. They watched Beth Avery as if she were a crown jewel. The people at the hospital had to get used to me and accept me as if I weren't there. So while I was waiting, I concentrated on checking out Pierce's computer records on her. My uncle had trained me on cyber espionage, and I had plenty of opportunity to get the records. And if they'd been able to contact Newell, they might never had to steal those records themselves, Eve thought. And what else did you find? Nothing incriminating, but her treatment was damn weird. She was drugged, and yet she had plenty of physical exercise. She swam and worked out in the gym. Once they even tried to take her skiing, but that required too much attention, and they were afraid she'd be damaged. He added bitterly. That's the way they put it. Damaged. As if she were a piece of property they had to keep in mint condition. And not a person at all, Eve said dully. She wasn't a person to them, Newell said, but she was damn important. There were notes by Pierce on the reports congratulating the different doctors and therapists who kept her in the pink of health. In spite of the necessary sedatives, he said that it was important to keep her from disintegrating in case the family ever came to check on her. It was of the utmost urgency that they strike a balance until the Averys decided about her disposition. Do you mean whether they wanted her dead? Joe asked bluntly. It was never spelled out, but the implication was there. I got the impression from those years of notes that there was some kind of conflict going on in the Avery family regarding Beth. Because they didn't just throw her into the hospital and forget about her? Eve asked. It seems to me that it came pretty damn close. They definitely didn't forget about her, Newell said. She was a thorn in their existence, even though they kept her in that place and tried to make her a zombie. But during the last months, I began to notice a difference in Pierce's attitude toward her. He cut out her exercise and made her stay in her room. It made me uneasy. I wondered if maybe the disposition had been decided upon. I had to find out. So I had Uncle Hermie send me some high-tech equipment and bugged Pierce's office. Did it work? Partially. I never heard the call actually setting up the attack on Beth, so I didn't know who was going to do it or when it was going to take place. He must have made that call somewhere else, but I monitored a call from Pierce to Nelda Avery, and it was oblique, but enough to raise a red flag. He said that he'd made the arrangement, and it would be handled soon. He said that he expected her to show her gratitude for his loyalty over the years in a generous manner. What did he say? Nothing that would incriminate her. I believe she's too smart to make any statement on the phone that would endanger her in any way. She said that she'd always be generous to people who made that poor girl comfortable. She said to let her know. Then she hung up. Cool. Very cool, Eve said thoughtfully. So Nelda Avery is behind Drogan's attempt. Presumably. At least she's the family member who's pulling the strings. Pierce was almost groveling when he was speaking to her. He must have been dancing on hot coals when he had to tell her that Beth had flown the coop. No wonder that Drogan is so frantic about finding Beth. Pierce is probably applying pressure. He frowned. Or maybe it's personal. Drogan was pretty intense, but it was anger at Beth that was coming through, not worry about what Pierce was going to do. He made a couple of ugly mentions of what he was going to do to Beth when he found her. Eve felt a chill. And you think that he may have found her already? I don't know. It could have happened. He looked at the GPS on the dashboard. We should know soon. Another 40 minutes. Drogan, what the hell are you doing? Pierce's voice was shaking with anger as Drogan finally picked up. I just had a call from the local police asking questions about Jesse Newell. I told you that any questioning had to be done discreetly. Just find out the information, then make the kill. You fumbled everything again. No, you did. Everything would have gone off just as I planned if that Detective Quinn hadn't interfered. You were supposed to throw him off the trail. I tried. Pierce took a deep breath. He's a cop. I couldn't just kick him out of the hospital. I thought that I might have convinced him that. Why was he making excuses to this idiot? He thought impatiently. Did you get a lead on Beth from Newell? Yes. He's the one who helped her get away from the hospital. I took Newell's phone and talked to her on his cell. Yes. Pierce's hand tightened on the phone. So you know where she is? No, she hung up on me before I could trace the car. You bungled that too. I'm getting very tired of your insults, Pierce. Be careful. Pierce struggled to curb his tongue as well as his rage. Drogan was definitely unbalanced and unpredictable. Besides, the man was his only path to Beth at the moment. You can hardly claim any great progress when you had a chance to trace her and lost her. I didn't lose her. What? I'm going after her right now. You should be grateful I didn't kill Noor. He's going to lead me right to her. After I hung up from talking to Beth Avery, I headed for the hospital where they'd taken Newell. I knew that if I hadn't damaged him too much, he'd be on his way to her as soon as he could. He wouldn't tell me anything even though I hurt him bad. If she meant that much to him, he wouldn't stay in that hospital when he knew I'd be after her. So I staked out the hospital parking lot and waited. And Newell was picked up by Quinn and whisked away from the hospital. Quinn again. And the woman who was with him at Newell's apartment. Find out who she is. I will. Quinn was displaying an odd intensity about Beth's case that was surely out of all proportion. He was reluctant to have to tell Nelda how badly the situation had deteriorated, but he might need her to do some discreet investigation on Detective Joe Quinn. You think that they're going to Beth Avery now? I'd bet on it, and I'm right behind them on the freeway. Quinn's taillights are only 4 car lengths ahead. Drogan hung up. Drogan is following Jesse Newell. He thinks he may be on his way to Beth, Pierce said to Stella as he pressed the disconnect. But Joe Quinn is with Newell. It could be bad if there's police interference. Maybe. She leaned on the corner of his desk. But when I talked to the hospital inquiring about Newell's condition, I found out that it was the emergency room who notified the local police. She smiled. Not Quinn, even though he was at the apartment. He seems to want to work alone. Now why would he do that? Now why would he want to do that? I think that we should find out. His gaze narrowed on her face. You don't like him? He didn't like me. He's either gay or a very cold fish. Pierce chuckled. He didn't respond. And your nose is out of joint. You want to punish him. Poor Stella. Shut up. I didn't really try. I only brushed up against him. She shrugged. But that's usually enough. He's not normal. I agree. But we've got to find out just what he is. He grimaced. And I have to call Nelda to help me do that. It won't be pleasant. But what comes afterward will be pleasant. She opened the top 3 buttons of her uniform, took his hand, and rubbed it against her breasts. I like pretending to be Nelda for you. I like the pain and the fierceness. I even like kneeling naked for you because I know it's just a game and that I'm really the one in control. But if I was really Nelda, I'd be the one hurting you. But you're not Nelda. His hand closed on the fullness of her breast. Then he squeezed with all his strength. You're just a whore I use whenever it amuses me. He watched her expression for pain or weakness. She only smiled and leaned forward and ran her tongue over his lips. Or do I use you? Who is really the whore, Harry? She stood up and buttoned her uniform. Ask Nelda, why don't you? She moved toward the door. I'll be waiting for you in the apartment. I'll give you a particularly good time if you find a way to get her to take down that snooty Quinn. He watched the door close behind her. He was as hard as a rock, just the way she'd wanted him to be. Why could she do this to him? He'd taken her because he'd wanted a woman who was the perfect sex toy, but her sexual dominance over him seemed to be getting stronger every day. Even at this moment when the situation was getting tense, she'd made him forget everything but her for that brief moment. Forget her take what he wanted as he usually did and go about his business. But those taunts about Nelda's dominance had been particularly annoying when he knew that he was going to have to tell Nelda that he'd lied to her about Beth's being found and brought back to the hospital. Damn it, just get it over with. He reached for his phone and punched in Nelda Avery's number. Stupid bastard. Nelda hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair. Keep calm, smother the anger. She'd managed to maintain an icy control with Pierce, but it had been difficult. She'd let him make excuses and had assured him that she'd find out about that troublesome police detective. She hadn't let him know the fury and disgust that were tearing through her, nor that he had forced her to make a decision she hadn't wanted to make. What's wrong? George had come into her bedroom from his own suite. Who's calling at this hour? It's almost midnight. Piss. She pushed back from her Louis XV desk. He's causing trouble. Nothing to bother you with. I'll take care of it. You don't want to talk about it? He shrugged. I'm just as happy that you don't. I'd rather stay out of your dealings with Pierce. That's the problem. I believe I'm going to have to stop dealing through Pierce and handle the matter myself. She went to the closet and pulled out a Louis Vuitton suitcase. I'm going out to the coast. I shouldn't be more than a few days. He went still. You're going to the hospital? Of course not. That would attract far too much attention. I just need to be nearby to be more effective. My dear, you're always effective. She glanced at him to see if he was being sarcastic, but he only looked very weary. In this case, I have to be, she added softly. For Rick's sake, there mustn't be any publicity that might take away the focus on what a fine president he'll be. She opened the case, which she always efficiently kept packed except for a few items she had to throw in at the last minute. I'll keep you informed of developments. Tell everyone I went to a spa to relax after the whirl of town meetings in the past few days. I'll tell them, but they may not believe me. Anyone who knows you would know that you thrive on pressure. He paused. What am I going to tell Rick? Nothing more than you tell the others. I'm going to call Lisa on the way to the airport and tell her to get her butt on a plane out of Miami and come here and make some appearances with Rick. She'll distract him enough to keep him from noticing that I'm not around. Do you think she'll come? She said when she left that she needed a long break. She'll come. She wants to be First Lady, and it's time she paid her dues. She slammed her suitcase shut. You've always felt sorry for her. She knew what the situation with Rick was before she married him. She was ambitious. She said she could work it out. She didn't know she was going to fall in love with him, Nelda, he said quietly. That's her problem. If she loves him, she should fall into line and do what's necessary to give him what he wants. She called for the car to be brought around. Damn, I forgot my night cream. She headed for the bathroom but paused at the door to glance at him over her shoulder. I may need Spotter to come out to Santa Barbara if I find Pierce too difficult. It should be okay. Rick will behave himself if Lisa is with him. She shrugged. If she stays at his side and watches him close enough. He does care about her. Which is very convenient considering they're married, he said dryly. But you counted on that too, didn't you? I knew it was a distinct possibility. Everyone loves Rick once they get to know him. She went into the bathroom and closed the door. She quickly went to the jewelry armoire, unlocked the compartment above the drawers, and drew out a .22 revolver. She stared at it for a moment. She doubted if it would be necessary to use it, but she always believed in being prepared. So stop hesitating and get on the move. She slipped the gun into her tote. Then she relocked the compartment and shut the armoire. She opened the bathroom door and smiled brilliantly at George. I'm all ready. Don't worry, everything is going to be fine. It's not as if I'm not aware of what's going on. I've made sure that what Pierce knows, I know. She moved toward the door. I should have taken care of the problem myself from the beginning. But it's not too late to save the situation. If anyone can do it, you can. That wariness in his tone again, she noticed. She'd have to address that attitude when she returned. It could hide signs of an underlying festering that would cause problems. I'll call you when I reach California. Thanks. He turned back to the door leading to his suite. Have a good flight. She hesitated in the hall after she closed the door behind her. Should she go back to him and try to smooth away that disturbance? No, it would be fine until she came back. She couldn't be everything to everyone. Rick was the important one at present. All the progress she'd attained from years of work could go down the drain if she didn't take care of this problem with Beth. As she started down the stairs, her hand slipped into her tote and closed on the revolver. It felt cool and hard and sleek beneath her touch. She had studied a number of guns before choosing this one because it had reminded her of her own personality. She could be just as dangerous and explosive as the weapon in her palm if she chose. She was a great problem solver, and so was a revolver. Not that she was contemplating solving the problem of Beth with this weapon, but one must have insurance, mustn't one?